But in discussing the sermons each week with the Bible study, I found that the uptake, the comprehension of the sermons was not at all what I had hoped. So I had a choice. I could blame the people gathered around the table for not listening closely enough, or I could recognize that I needed to do something different. So I've done something different. If I do my job, or have done my job in preparation, you should be able to answer the 7 questions on the sheet. And if you can do that, then I think you will get the benefit from the message that I would hope. A leper came to him begging him and kneeling. He said to him, "If you choose, you can make me clean." In all my life, I have never felt that desperate. I've never once thrown myself down on my knees in front of another person and begged or pleaded as this man did before Christ. I'd be a bit surprised if any of you have either. This was an extraordinarily emotional encounter. The man held nothing back, abandoned every shred of dignity and decorum. And Jesus found himself overcome with emotion. Both of them surrendered to an intense intimacy and a rather convulsive connection. In all of the New Testament, there is no disease regarded with more terror and pity than leprosy. Biblical scholars explain that no other disease reduces a human being to so hideous a wreck. Wherever on the body this dreaded skin disease begins, it soon attacks the victim's face with dark, discolored patches. The patches inevitably become ulcerated until the man or woman loses their human appearance. Slowly, the sufferer becomes a mass of ulcerated growths all over their face and body. In biblical times, the average course of the disease was 9 years, and it ended in mental decay, coma, and ultimately death. The victim became utterly repulsive both to himself and to others. The sufferer was regarded as unclean. He was not to be touched under any circumstances, lest the disease spread. He was banished from contact with all others. He must dwell alone outside the town. And if anyone did come within his vicinity, the leper must give warning of his polluted presence by crying out, "Unclean, unclean." During the Middle Ages, when someone was found to be a leper, he was led into the church building during the week by a priest wearing a stole and carrying a crucifix, and the burial service was read over him. The leper was a man already dead, though technically still physically alive. He must not have come into a church service, but while the service went on, he might peek through what they called the leper squint, cut into the walls of the church building. The treatment of lepers in the United States during the first half of the 20th century wasn't too much better. As recently as the 1960s, lepers in the United States were forbidden to ride on public transportation, could not fly over certain states, or use public restrooms. Babies born to women in leprosy hospitals had to immediately be given up for adoption. Then, beginning with sulfur drugs and later some powerful new antibiotics, leprosy was brought under control in America. The last hospital for leprosy patients was in Carville, Louisiana, and it closed in 1997. The disease is now successfully treated on an outpatient basis. Now we can appreciate the scene before us that Mark describes. This hideous, helpless man on his knees before Jesus, perhaps bearing the likeness of a monster in a Hollywood film. His whole life riding on the outcome, awaiting Christ's response to his desperate appeal. We are told at least two things. The Revised Standard Version tells us that Jesus was moved with pity. But that really doesn't do the scene justice. The original Greek suggests that Christ's emotional state became one of violent passion. The commentator William Barclay has it that Jesus was, quote, moved with pity to the depths of his being. Christ's heart was near breaking for this man who knelt before him. And then Jesus did the unthinkable. He reached out and touched him. This man probably hadn't felt the touch of another human being for years. Jesus placed his hand upon his rotting flesh and pronounced, "Be clean." And he was. The man was told to keep quiet and just show himself to the priest and be declared clean and fit to rejoin society. Fat chance. He understandably launched his own one-man cable news network. He covered so much ground, told so many people, that every town for miles around knew about him and knew who healed him. Jesus was moved mightily with pity to the depths of his being. Take a spiritual snapshot here. Keep a photo of this happening in the wallet of your heart. And when your soul loses sight of God, take it out and gaze gratefully upon it. This human-friendly God, filled with pity for an insignificant wretch, is a far cry from the thundering, unapproachable deity of Mount Sinai in the Old Testament. This Jesus is other than the God of either Christian or Muslim fundamentalist fanatics who hold to a God who can condemn billions to an eternal hell of everlasting torment. A God some relish committing suicide for in the attempt to kill thousands of people. And above all, this is not the God of our own consciences that reflects our varied upbringings and can be either benign or brutal or anything in between. It is not necessarily good news when someone proclaims faith in a God. We first need to determine whether they or we are giving our loyalty to the Christ who stood with this leper, moved with pity to the depths of his being. Jesus was moved mightily. Perhaps the secret of moving closer to God is simply allowing ourselves to move closer to our own human feelings. Perhaps the woman or man who is more deeply Christian is the one who is more genuinely and fully human. To be moved mightily with pity to the depths of our hearts. That's our job. We're the church. That's what we're called to do. Jesus no longer walks the earth as he did centuries ago, to be violently stirred and so to touch the untouchable. That's where you and I come in. That's what it means to be the church. The power and the purpose comes from the pity. And when a church connects with the pity Jesus felt, it discovers its power and its purpose. That's why it is so essential that we know the church is never something that we attend, like a ball game or a play. The church is who we are, with enough pity for the needy we will be filled with power and purpose. So by all means, let us make ready to pity the pathetic of the population. But I said in the beginning that I had never in all my life felt such desperation that I was moved to throw myself down before anyone and beg and plead. I must add that neither in all my life have I ever experienced the joy, the delight of deliverance, the enormous thankfulness learned by this leper. And perhaps neither have any of you. And I'm not about to mourn that none of us are so mightily afflicted as was this leper. But it is a bit dangerous for us to prime ourselves to pity the pathetic we peruse, as though we ourselves are without wounds, are strangers to suffering, or unacquainted with affliction. We can only be the church if we have a history of being helped, if we have a sense of being saved. Our own troubles need not have been as terrible as the lepers, but we do need a respect for the pain we have had and do experience, the losses we have learned. Much of our genuine humanity depends on our willingness to grieve our losses, our pain, our wounds, to become strong in the broken places. That healing is much of what makes us truly human and allows us to connect compassionately. Doris Kearns Goodwin, in her 2005 bestseller, Team of Rivals, in which she spotlights Abraham Lincoln's political skills, includes the tragedies that befell him in his childhood and youth. Lincoln's beloved mother died when he was 9. He then lost his oldest sister, who he had come to rely on at 19. And then Anne Rutledge, arguably the love of his life, to typhoid fever when Lincoln was in his mid-20s. Goodwin concludes, Lincoln's early intimacy with tragic loss reinforced a melancholy temperament, yet his familiarity with pain and personal disappointment imbued him with a strength and an understanding of human frailty unavailable to most others. In the course of his presidency, he enjoyed nothing more than writing letters of pardon for young soldiers who had been condemned to be shot for various offenses, such as falling asleep on guard duty. Mothers would write to him and plead for their sons, and he would sit down with a stack of these letters and almost always grant the pardon, and he found nothing more satisfying than that. He understood human frailty. Jesus knew pain and disappointment, and he had an understanding of human frailty that allowed him to be moved with pity to the depths of his being. Do we have an appreciation of our own frailty that allows us to experience the comfort we need from ourselves and others? In conclusion, it was the Buddha who once wisely said, resolve to be tender with the young, compassionate with the aged, sympathetic with the striving, and tolerant with the weak and the wrong. Sometime in your life, you will have been all of these.